The last principle is the principle of reciprocity, and in many ways this is where all the principles come together. Of course they all overlap quite a bit. I mean, equality leads to autonomy and choice, and voice leads to dialogue, and dialogue is a reflective conversation, and that reflective conversation, if it's meaningful, is grounded in praxis. So they all kind of overlap, but it's in reciprocity that it comes together. If I see you as a partner, then I see our interactions as mutually humanizing, mutual learning opportunities. The old saying about reciprocity is, when one teaches, two learn, that we both benefit from this experience. And I've explored it in a number of different ways, but in particular I want to stress 3 books that have shaped my thinking about reciprocity, and then sort of close with one quote in particular that I think is important. The thing about reciprocity is we enter into conversations as learners, not judges. We expect to get back as much or more than we give. I talk to coaches all the time, and often they tell me, I love my job. This is my favorite job. I don't want to stop being a coach. But part of me would love to go back to the classroom because I've learned so much working with the teachers I've learned with. I'd like to try all that stuff I've been learning. And when you're living out the principle of reciprocity, you're learning from the people you're working with. So anyway, one of the people who got me thinking about mutual learning with as opposed to teaching, was Peter Senge. And Senge had this to say about learning in my old beat-up version of the learning organization book, The Fifth Discipline. He said, learning organizations are possible because deep down, we all are learners. No one has to teach a child how to learn. In fact, no one has to teach infants anything. They are intrinsically inquisitive, masterful learners who learn to walk, speak, pretty much run their households all on their own. Learning organizations are possible because not only is it in our nature to learn, but we love to learn. At the heart of reciprocity, there is this notion that to really feel a fulfilling life, we need to be a learning life. And so if I'm just doing something to you, telling you what to do, adopting a top-down approach to communication, and we're not learning together, there's a sense in which that impoverishes the person who's receiving it. On the other hand, if we're learning together and learning with each other, it's empowering for both parties. It's good for both parties. One book that really captures the case for reciprocity is this one, Adam Grant's book, Give and Take. It's a wonderful little book about, well, I shouldn't say little, it's a powerful and important book, but he talks about the difference between givers and takers, people whose adaptation to life or orientation to life is to be in a reciprocity stance, or those who just take from others. I'll just give you a few quotes from the book to kind of capture what he says. He quotes, for example, Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, "Every person must decide whether he or she will walk in the light of creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. Are we going to be altruistic in our stance towards other people, what I called loving earlier on, after I looked at Paulo Freire, or are we going to take as much as we can get?" Adam Grant says later on in the book, "This is what I found most magnetic about successful givers, people who embrace the concept of reciprocity. They get to the top without cutting others down, finding ways of expanding the pie that benefit themselves and the people around them. Whereas success is zero-sum in a group of takers. I win, you lose. In groups of givers, it may be true that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts." And the last thing he says is, one thing that holds us back from being givers, the reciprocal response, is the fear of being judged. We're worried that people will see us as weak or naive, and that keeps us from operating like givers in the workplace. Well, I would argue that when we embrace the partnership principles, we work from a perspective of being a giver and a receiver. It's a reciprocal, mutual learning experience, but it's more than learning. It's mutual in terms of the value of the conversation. And no one has taught me that more than my last book, Margaret Wheatley's book, Turning to One Another. I just want to show you, I was looking through this today, the highlighting I did. Pretty much, if there's a word in there, it's got a line beside it or a sticky note or highlighting or underlining. And in the book, she has a few quotes to kind of position this book about the power of conversation. It's turning to one another, simple conversations to restore hope to the future. A book that's, I think, even more relevant now than it was when she wrote it. And she says these two things. Human conversation is the most ancient and easiest way to cultivate the conditions for change. Personal change, community and organizational change, planetary change. If we can sit together and talk about what's important to us, we begin to come alive. That's the key idea. Our conversations don't diminish us, they bring us alive. They help us flourish and grow rather than diminish us. And she says later in the book, the simplest way to begin finding each other again is to start talking about what we care about. If we can stop ignoring each other, stop engaging in fear-filled gossip, what might we discover? So those are the partnership principles. 7 ideas, 7 principles that help us decide how to do what we do. They're a theory for change, and I think there's something bigger. The first principle was equality, the idea that we see the value of other people. We don't think we're better than other people. In fact, when we approach people as coaches, we almost see it as an act of service. How can I help you do what you want to do? We talked about the complexities of choice, that professionals can't choose if they want to call themselves professionals to stop learning. Learning is what professionals do. But there are some things that are non-negotiable, and change is complex. We talked about voice, the importance of people feeling like their opinion matters. They feel like they've been heard. And then we interact in a way that does value what people say. And when we value what teachers say, teachers often value what students say. And when students feel like their voice has been heard, Russ Qualia says that they're way more likely to succeed, 7 times more likely to succeed, he says. Well, when we've got equality, choice, and voice, probably our mode of discourse is dialogue, a back and forth flow of conversation where both of us feel heard, where we're thinking together, exploring ideas. And a dialogue should be energizing, and we should feel great about having the conversation. We should walk away better for having had that conversation. And it usually involves reflection. Thinking together, exploring ideas, sometimes looking back, sometimes looking at, sometimes looking ahead. And I really see in the professional development we do, when we share ideas, however we might do it, we position the person we're sharing with as the decision maker. I wanted to write a book once called The Thinking Audience, about the way we do workshops. And in coaching, we see the teacher as the decision maker in the process. And the last principle, second last principle, is praxis. Praxis is the idea that we're focused on something that matters, that we care about, that taps into my purpose. We're reflecting, acting on real life stuff. It's not some theory, it's real life application. We're not learning about cooperative learning in a workshop. We're saying maybe if I use cooperative learning tomorrow, my kids will feel more engaged in the learning, or they'll learn more, or they'll have more voice in what they learn. And lastly was the principle we just discussed, reciprocity, that basic idea that when one teaches, two learn. Together, those principles represent a way of approaching others, but I think they represent something bigger. It's a different vision for how we can interact, both in and outside of school, but in particular, I'm focused on a vision for how we function in organizations like schools. If we really want change, we need to create schools where people feel heard, where they have autonomy, where they have choice, where they have responsible accountability focused on real life change, and where their thrilling experience of learning is reflected in the learning that the kids have. I don't think it's a small thing. I think maybe the biggest problem we face in schools is we think we can just tell teachers what to do and expect them to do it. If we want professionals raising our students in our schools, if we want schools guided by professionals, we have to treat them like professionals. And to me, that's treating them like partners.